Welcome to Church on Tap. As you can see, we are not at Waterman's today. We are recording this because we're going to be away at Wild Goose, some of us, and some are going to be at other places. We're not even going to talk about that because we're all just a little bit jealous that he's going to be at Bald Head Island.
Yeah, I'm jealous you're going to be at Wild Goose.
So a lot of jealousy going on around the table here today. So glad that you have joined with us. This is not the fifth Sunday. Last Sunday was the fifth Sunday, but on our fifth Sundays we like to have conversation Sundays. So Sundays where we ask questions and answer questions and just have conversation around whatever is going on. And so if you don't know, I'm Gayle. I am the pastor at Church on Tap, and this is Kelley.
And I am a pastor at Grace United Methodist.
And this is Pastor Shawn.
And I'm the pastor at St. Paul's United Methodist down in Carolina Beach.
So we tend to be a bunch of Methodists here. We won't hold that against us, maybe. So anyway, today, as you can see, we're all sitting here on the porch, and none of us are wearing the dreaded mask. We all have one in our pocket somewhere. I think it's probably a good bet. I'm not going to fish mine out right now, but I do have one in my pocket. We are not wearing masks today because of a couple of reasons. One, we are sitting outside, even though we're on the porch. It is a screened-in porch, and we have a fan that is blowing above us, so we are very well ventilated in this space. But also, we have all been vaccinated, and so because we've been vaccinated, that is one of the reasons that we are not wearing masks together. And
the inner circle, we work together, and
that's exactly where I was going next. Is that we are a bit of our own pod. That Shawn and I work together every day, and Kelley and I work together at least once or twice a week, and so we really have created a pod for ourselves. Today, our topic is going to be about wearing masks and about COVID and vaccines, and we're just going to see where this conversation takes us in our current circumstances in the world, and what we think about that. I'm going to start with churches gathering together. That's a thing for us at Church on Tap. We meet in a bar. It is a private room, and so we have a little bit of not being in a private space. But what do you guys think about churches gathering together?
It's been the hardest decision that we've had to keep making for the past, 18-20 months?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And although we've mostly made those decisions by a vote of our council, still a lot of that pressure falls on the pastor, who in our system, of course, it makes the final decisions when it comes to worship. We've tried as best we can to follow the advice of people who are legitimate medical professionals and experts in the field, and tried as best we could to make it non-political, because ultimately it's not. It's about caring for our neighbor and doing the best we can. And related to that is that what we found a few months into the pandemic last year, at least several months in, is that for many people, the inability to gather in person was itself an extreme risk. There were especially many older people with failure to thrive, who developed illnesses or grew worse during the time of isolation. And so there are risks to not gathering as well. So our question then becomes, how can we gather in the safest way possible? And the advice on that runs the gamut from, we don't need to wear masks because Jesus will protect us, to just in case we shouldn't gather at all and we should do everything online. I, of course, have fallen somewhere in between, seeing the value of gathering in person. But at times we've done that only outside. or only in a space where we could spread out. At times like now, we have avoided congregational singing because there's some pretty hard science behind the fact that that expels a lot of contagious particles into the air. And there have been times a couple of months ago, I can wistfully remember where we were close to back to normal. But that's back to normal practices. Attendance was about 2/3 of what it was before the pandemic. And I'm probably in that camp of people who say that things have permanently changed. There's been a shift, and we'll have to make some adjustments.
I want to add to what you were saying about failure to thrive. Growing up, I mean, I was a pastor's daughter, and now as a pastor, church is my life. It's my work. It's my calling. It is what I center my weeks around. And I was extremely depressed not having that relation. I mean, most, Gayle excluded, most pastors are extroverts. Shawn's not an extrovert either. I'm an extrovert.
But more pastors are introverts.
They are.
Actually.
Wow. Well, I feed. Yeah.
50 and 60%.
I feed off of that interaction with people. And it might even be extrovert, introvert. I feed off that relationship with people. I hate preaching to a camera. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. This is even kind of hard, but luckily there's people with me.
This is very hard.
Yeah, when I'm preaching or teaching, I want to interact, and so I failed to thrive. There were a lot of complications just from my own personal life, and so as eager as I was to get back to what is our new normal, I had to rely on the medical experts in our church and trust them, even though it was against everything I wanted, and that was difficult. That was very difficult.
So I mean, let's talk about medical science, or just science, and how that relates to our religious beliefs. Because Shawn alluded to the thing that I've heard several times, which is, I've been vaccinated. I've been vaccinated by the blood of the Lamb. And which is just kind of one of my favorite things that I've heard in kind of a jokey way, that somehow we are protected because we are protected by God, because God is on our side, and that we don't have to do things that normal people have to do in order to protect themselves. And what do you think about that? Theologically, where do you come down on that?
I fall into 1 Corinthians 12, and this is going to be bad if I got that wrong. I probably did. Where we're parts of the body, and each part has their own job to do. God gives us different gifts. I think the way God works is through that body. And I am grateful that He gave the gift of wisdom when it comes to medicine and science to our medical professionals. And me ignoring the gift that He gave them to be that hand or foot or whatever part of the church body it is, me failing to accept the wisdom and the talents and the gifts He gave them, is me being a bad Christian. That's how I feel.
Yeah, and I would concur with that. I think back to the story about the man who was trapped in his house during a flood. He prayed that God would save him, and his neighbor came, knocked on the door, said, "Hey, we're getting out of here. I've got a John boat, you want to come with us?" And the guy said, "No, God will save me." It started rising, and the guy moved up to his roof, and another boat came by. And he said, "No, I don't need it. God's going to save me." And kept praying, and the waters rose and rose. And finally, a Coast Guard helicopter came to offer the guy a lift out, and the guy insisted, "No, God's going to save me." So inevitably, of course, he passes, gets to heaven, and asks God, "Why didn't you save me?" God said, "Well, I sent 2 boats and a helicopter."
Yeah, parts of the body were there.
Yeah, God, God gives us vaccines. God gives us people who give us good advice based on the best knowledge they have available about wearing masks, about social distancing, about other things we can do. But, of course, we've had this whole thing, especially in some corners of Christianity, that science is somehow opposed to the church, as if science does not reveal to us more about God and God's creation. And I just really struggle with that. I mean, Jesus is going to protect you from some things, and God can protect you from anything. But as I always say, God loves us enough to give us free will, and God allows us to exercise that free will and deal with the consequences of it.
It's interesting to me that we're still fighting this idea that, it goes back to, is the earth round, and, the discovery of gravity. The church was opposed to so many of these things because, well, it's not what it says in the Bible. Well, it's not, it's not what God told us. And it's like, well, science is not an unreal thing. Mm-hmm. Science is like a real deal. And we discover things that we didn't know before. But this argument seems to be almost as old as time. That these things we discover aren't necessarily of God. And I just want to shout, who do you think made all this?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think it comes from? We didn't make it up. God made it up. And we're just now discovering it.
The designer of the creation is amazing in the way it was designed.
Well, and the cool thing is we just keep discovering new stuff. We just keep
That's what God did.
Stuff.
Right. Yeah. Incredible stuff.
I am. Go ahead.
All right, I was going to say, I think about Belton Joiner's book, Being Methodist in the Bible Belt. And he has an illustration there where he talks about the Bible and a science book and the differences between the two. And he says it's like the difference between a chocolate cake and a pen. He said, you can write something with a chocolate cake and you can chew on your pen, but that's not what they were intended for. They each are meant to do different things. The Bible's not trying to be a science textbook or a history book. The Bible is trying to tell us about who God is and who we are and how God works with us and how we become part of God's great narrative. And I think when people try to take it in a way that even the original writers did not intend, it gets warped and twisted in so many different ways, including in ways that threaten people's health.
Our next conversation Sunday is going to center around, is the Bible chocolate cake or a pen?
Yes. That's a thesis paper
Stay
right
tuned.
there. Which is it?
We will be debating that next. So when it comes to vaccines, so let's just jump straight to vaccines. When it comes to vaccines, I know that you and I know for sure, and I think you as well, all got it as soon as we were eligible. So the minute we were eligible, we were all just signing up and getting it as quick as we could.
My children did too. They were right as soon as they could.
Yeah, so,
no question about it.
And I was most insistent on getting my mom signed up as quick as she could. But for those people who are hesitant, I think that it's easy, and I'll speak for myself here, it's easy for me to become very frustrated with people who are eligible, who it's readily available. I heard on the news yesterday, there's more vaccine than we have people who want to take it now. And people who said, and their excuse was, well, it's not fully approved by the FDA, and as soon as it's fully approved, I will go get the vaccine. And now, I mean, at least the Pfizer, I think it's the only one that's got full approval now, but the others are
a couple of weeks away from
they're right on the heels. And so, but now they're coming up with new excuses for why they're not going to get the vaccine. So, what do you guys think when it comes to this refusal to take the vaccine? And how do you think that we can encourage people to go ahead and what's the Hamilton song? Not
throw away your shot.
Not throw away their shot. So how do we encourage people to not throw away their shot?
Well,
that's a difficult one. I think we have within, especially the United States, especially the religious groups, we have anti-vaxxers, and it's not just this shot. It's
right.
I mean, and it goes to the extreme of people who, like Scientologists, who don't accept any medicine, don't accept any medical intervention, to anti-vaxxers who don't want to get their kids vaccinated for religious purposes, to, you know, to people who just this one shot is so scary. And I think part of that, when it's coming from, this actually feeds into another conversation we had earlier, is your teachers, your preachers, your family that surround you are who you go to for advice. And I don't know if you are not that person's preacher or teacher or friend, if you don't have a personal relationship with them, how you do that. Because, I mean, it's a trust issue, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. And because a great number of people, of course, are getting their information from a variety of sources. I had a conversation yesterday with a woman in my church who has a PhD, and she focused on research methodology. And so, of course, her question for people is always, what's your source? But the truth is, there are a great number of people out there who don't trust any kind of legitimate mainstream source. They are much more trusting of talk radio personalities or faux news or things that are targeted to try to make them question the efficacy of government and question the motives of their neighbors. And so, and don't get me wrong, I think as followers of Jesus, we should have a healthy skepticism about our government, but we should also have a robust love for our neighbors, to the point that I believe we owe it to them to sacrifice our own personal comfort and preferences in order to help them.
Sacrifice of comfort, especially with this. If you, I mean, I understand injecting something in your body, you can go down a rabbit trail with that, but this is just a minimal discomfort for protecting, especially the younger children and the vulnerable populations that can't get vaccinated. I
Right.
don't know how that falls outside of that Good Samaritan, love your neighbor idea. I can't, my brain can't wrap around how that doesn't fall into that category.
So what, as Shawn was talking, I kept coming back to thinking about the verse in Proverbs that says, you know, lean not on your own understanding. And I will tell you, I don't like the second half of that verse, which says, and God will make your path straight. Because I'm pretty sure that God made my path very curvy, and I'm quite okay with that. But, you know, so not all of our paths are straight, y'all, and that's okay. But I do think that there's something to this, don't lean on your own understanding. And I think that we like to do that. We like to pick and choose in the news, in conversations, in our religion, in anything else. I mean, let's talk about Leviticus. How many people do you know that will tell you, back to the straight thing here, that, you know, you're wrong because of Leviticus, but they're wearing some polyblend shirt. You know, they're wearing some fishing shirt that is some polyblend wicking mess. which they're uncomfortable, by the way, but that's a whole nother story. But that's what they're wearing. They're okay with that because that part of Leviticus doesn't matter.
Oh, they
All
love
that
their
matters.
pork and shellfish.
Oh, they so love this shellfish.
Leviticus is a great thing to bring up for this conversation.
Okay.
Because Leviticus had some of the most advanced medical advice of anybody at that time. The laws in Leviticus, most of which were created to protect the tribe. That's the reason they created those laws. Majority of the laws in Leviticus are things like if someone is sick, they need to be taken away from the tribe and quarantined until they are cleaned and brought back into the tribe. And that sickness ranged from female sickness once a month to leprosy to any kind of thing that came across as that person is not healthy. And it was phenomenal, the wisdom God gave the Israelites at that time so they could protect themselves. But what astounds me is they're going to focus on that one particular verse and they have no understanding of its true meaning. Woo. They have no understanding. I just got disinfected. And I'm pure and clean now. Cleansed by the blood of the deer. But Leviticus tells us, if you're looking at Leviticus, that we need to quarantine. We need to wear clothing that is safe for us in specific environments. That if we are to be holy, and we are to go into the places of God, we need to make sure that we are healthy so that we protect the other people in those holy places. So I find it interesting that the same people who like Leviticus for certain reasons ignore it for this.
Oh, wait. People just kind of pick and choose their own parts of scripture that they want to follow?
Yeah.
It's hard to believe, isn't it?
What a surprise.
Well, I think that's true of all rules. I mean, let's just talk about that. I mean, like, I'm not a big fan of the speeding rules. Like, how fast can you go is not one of my favorite rules, and I kind of pick and choose when I decide to follow that. Yeah. Sometimes I have to go to traffic court like this morning because of that. And so, we pick and choose the rules that we follow. We pick and choose because of what suits us and makes our life easier. And then we wonder why we have consequences. And I think that is the big part of that. Like, what's the consequence that comes out of this? And really it does come back to, and I think you both said it, how are we loving our neighbor? How are we loving the other people in this space with us?
Right, and the argument, of course, I keep hearing more outside the church than inside the church is this argument of personal freedom, right? This is an infringement on my personal freedom, which maybe you can make that argument outside the church. I would say that it's still a bit of a stretch when it comes to dealing with a worldwide pandemic. But within the church, you have two comparisons that I see. You see, early in the Old Testament, the story of creation and fall and kind of what goes on with the world, you have the story of Cain and Abel. And Cain, who is envious of his brother, kills him. And God comes and asks Cain where Abel is. And Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" The murderous, sinful, corrupted Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Whereas in the New Testament you have a vision of a God who abandons the privilege of power and comes to be among us and actually submits himself so much to the suffering of the world that he's willing to suffer and die on a cross for us. A self-giving love that gives up all idea that it is about my personal freedom, but rather about our love for our neighbor. Because yes, we are a brothers and sisters keeper. We do owe it to others to help take care of them. As Mother Teresa said, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other.
Wow.
So it reminds me of a story that one of our pastor friends shared on his Facebook page this past week, and I will tell it completely incorrectly, and so, but I'm going to tell it anyway. This woman who was talking about how people who were taking the vaccine were sheep, and she did not want to be a sheep, and she is quoting scripture, of God dividing the sheep and the goats. And he asked her, well, which are you? And she said, I'm a goat, because I'm not going to be a sheep. And of course, in the story in the Bible, separating the sheep and the goats, the sheep are the ones who are the ones following God, the ones being who God would have them to be, and the goats are the ones who are being condemned and sent out away from God. And I think that goes back to such modern Christianity, that people are quoting the Bible in this absolute incorrect way. Like they truly have not, like they heard this somewhere that this is a biblical thing, sheep and goats.
Yeah.
And so I'm quoting it because it's biblical, but missing the point completely. And I think that is such a perfect example of Christianity in America today.
Yeah.
That people are claiming it. They're naming it and claiming it.
Name it and claim it.
And yet, completely missing the point in doing that.
Unless you're intentionally wanting to join up with others on the road to hell. But, yeah. I'm sorry, but the cake song keeps going through my head. Sheep go to heaven, goats go to hell,
Yes.
go to hell, go to hell. So,
There's lots of those songs that we have from.
for those of you who need reference, the Gospel of Matthew chapter 25 and cake, I believe it is, which album was that?
I'm used to
Oh gosh.
Yes.
But look up cake in 1990s. Early 2000s.
There are so many times that we are called to be sheep, and it's so funny that people say, I don't want to be a sheep. To me, it blows my mind. In a Christian context, they're saying it as Christians, and I'm going, that is the whole Lord is my shepherd idea. But I actually shared a video on social media earlier this week where the wisdom of a comedian shared the story of Noah's Ark, and about how Noah's building this ark to save the world from this disaster that's happening, and no one would get on the ark. No one was listening. And he was like, the ark's got plenty of room, come on. The animals are listening, no one else is listening. Now this is one of the stories that I despise from the Bible sharing, because it's Noah's Ark is not one of my favorites. Not something you need to teach your children or anything, but when you look at it in this context, it makes sense. Everyone should have gotten on the ark with Noah, because God had given Noah the wisdom of how to escape this massive disaster that was happening. Yet, no one got on the ark. And the person that I shared said, the vaccine, the mask, this idea is this year's ark. It's our ark. Oh. And are we listening? Are we following Noah, who has been given the wisdom? Are we following our medical doctors, who have been given the wisdom to save us from this disaster? Or are we going, that person doesn't know what they're talking about, I'm going to go over here because I know better. I want to be, if this is the ark, I want to be on the ark. And it came from someone who was not a pastor. Made me a little jealous.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Wait, you mean God can speak to people who aren't pastors?
I know. Sometimes things get better through them.
Wow.
Yes. It takes a lot of advanced degrees to get the knowledge that we have. Not really.
And yet God chooses who they're going to speak to and through,
yes.
And we have no control over that, degrees or not.
Yeah,
and I think
that's exactly right.
I think God is currently speaking through our medical professionals, through their tears that we see as they're fighting this and they're on the front lines of fighting this, through their wisdom that we see. And I mean, there are so many things in this world that we are trying to find solutions for medically. From cancer to AIDS, which there was some news on that forefront when it came to vaccines and the mix of all of this. But There's so many things that we struggle to resolve, and yet, because this was a worldwide pandemic, the entire world community of health people came together and in such a short time was able to find a way to protect us. That's God at work to me. That is what you call a miracle, is that they were able to collectively join and share their wisdom so that they could save us. I couldn't have done that. That's not something that's in my power to do. And it blows my mind every time I think about it. And that something as simple as a piece of cloth can make such a big difference. For me, that's another idea of a miracle. That you can take something so simple and save someone's life.
Yeah.
I'm in for those.
Ultimately, like, some of these masks obviously help to protect us against others. This is one that filters a little more and gives me some protection. But it really, I'm not too concerned about myself. I don't have underlying health issues. I wear a mask to protect other people because that's what the science is about. It's protecting other people from your expulsions that go out into the air.
I don't know that I can think of a more Christian concept than doing something to protect other people. That doesn't really have any great consequence for yourself, but doing it just for the sheer fact that you are protecting another person.
Yeah.
That seems to me to be like the absolute basis of Christianity. And the fact that there are people who would claim Christianity and refuse, to me, is a little mind. I wonder, like, did you just skip all of the tenets of Christianity? Did you just absolutely not pay attention to any sermon or any Sunday school ever? And how did you get to that point where you think that not protecting others is a Christian idea?
I know that one. That is a direct result of the warped evangelicalism of the 20th century that made it all about me and Jesus.
Amen. Got
our own thing going, and Jesus has made it so I can go to heaven when I die, and it's all about me and what I get out of it, and all about my personal, individual salvation. It's not about finding my life in God or caring for our neighbors. I mean, if you want to do that, that's great, but you know, and I think that idea of this sort of, you posted something about this the other day, about a consumer Christianity, that when it's all about a spiritual product or service that we consume, that something has gotten way out of line. And that's how I think people can reconcile their Christianity with this idea of their personal freedom and not worrying about their neighbors as much as they worry about themselves.
I'm going to blame our profession. I'm going to blame the pastors. Now, I want you to understand there are a vast number of churches and denominations and across the world. There are a vast number of religious practices across the world. But when it comes to United States fundamentalist Christianity, we see pastors who may or may not be educated in the same way a lot of other pastors are, who see and interpret scripture completely differently, and people trust their pastors. And so when you're choosing a church, you need to understand fundamentally and scientifically and across the board what that pastor believes, because you are depending on them to teach you what you should believe. You're depending on them for your faith basis. And I'm not just going to, and this is going to get a little sticky, I am not just going to blame those extreme fundamentalist pastors. I'm actually going to put more blame on the moderate pastors, because we have been in a very comfortable space, and this is hard to say, but we have been in a very comfortable space. We have been able to walk our Christian walk, ignore the extreme side of our Christian faith, and just kind of, okay, we're doing what we should do. We're loving our neighbors. We're going to ignore them. And then the pandemic hit. And other things politically hit in our country right before the pandemic, where we saw that if we don't speak up and we just stay in our comfort zones, and moderate pastors are in very comfortable places, financially, spiritually, leading their denominations, they don't have to say too much, and everyone still listens. We've been in a comfort zone. And in that comfort zone, we've allowed the extremists to rise, and we've allowed people to walk out of the doors of the church. And when it comes to protecting our flocks, being comfortable is not the place we can be. Jesus wasn't comfortable when he protected his flock. A shepherd is never comfortable. A shepherd suffers. The shepherd has to carry the staff. A shepherd has to go after the wolves. The sheep aren't supposed to. And it is a scary place. I mean, just talking about this is a scary thing for pastors to do, because there is always reaction and feedback. There's always people who are going to call us heretics. There's always the people who are going to attack our churches financially. And so I am going to say yes, the Christian fundamentalists who are following pastors are not in a great place, but I blame the moderate religious movement for not speaking up sooner.
But I think part of that too is that I think that a lot of moderate pastors, especially those moderate pastors who are in congregations that are have an element of fundamentalist in them, who have an element of across the board mix, and you know, I'll admit I'm guilty of this. Like, we try to step gingerly, we try to step carefully, because we don't want to push people out. We're trying to draw everyone in, and in our attempt to draw everyone in, we've kind of ended up in the, spew you out kind of place. We've ended up in that place where the scripture says that we are lukewarm. We are not being on fire. We are not speaking the way that we want to speak, the way that we know that we're called to speak. And in that lukewarm space, we're allowing fundamentalists to continue to have its hold, and yet I don't even know how I would say that. We are not moving forward in the way that we need to move forward, because we're trying to make everyone comfortable. Everyone, we want them to keep coming back.
Right.
And so we're so concerned with people coming back. Especially those people that we disagree with. We want to make them comfortable. And I agree with you. Jesus wasn't really trying to make people comfortable, as much as he was really trying to get us to get off our ass and do something.
And the heart, this goes beyond many issues we've had to deal with, because this is life or death. This is people having either dying from COVID or having long-term life changes because of medical issues that arise from COVID. So it's not just about a political belief or accepting a person or a prejudice, which are all horrible things that we should be fighting, but this is a life or death issue.
Yeah. Absolutely is. And not just for those who are dealing with COVID. As my parishioner pointed out yesterday, it's about all those people who need medical treatment but can't get a spot in the hospital because they're taken up with unvaccinated COVID patients.
Exactly.
They can't have that heart procedure that they need to have. They can't get in to be treated for the infection or for pneumonia that wasn't COVID related. They can't have that surgery that will save their lives from a world of pain, because there's a COVID patient taking up that bed right now. I don't know how I can make people see that it goes beyond them, but honestly, I think it has to affect people personally. It's like that church in Jacksonville that the pastor for months railed against the wearing of masks and getting the vaccine and not living in fear and all that, and then several people in his church died of COVID, and dozens of people came down with it. The next week they had a vaccination clinic at their church. They finally realized that it wasn't just some big conspiracy. And I hate for that to have to happen to somebody, for them to grasp the reality of the situation. I don't. As much as some people like snicker a bit and say they got what they deserve, I don't know. Coming from a standpoint of grace, I'm never a really big fan of people getting what they deserve necessarily.
It's heartbreaking.
We're offered grace that we don't get what we deserve in some ways, and we get more than what we deserve in other things. And I'd like to see more of that grace offered.
And it just keeps coming back to, I mean, no matter how we come at this conversation, we just keep coming back to how are we caring for each other? And how are we caring for other people? Like, we just can't get away from that. And too often, as with so many things in life, we don't really care about it until it affects us personally. Someone in your family gets cancer, a particular kind of cancer, and all of a sudden, what do you care about? You care about all those people who have that.
And you're doing the walks.
And you're doing the walks, and you're doing the fundraising, and you're caring about the research, and because it affects you personally. You don't care about how safe the streets are until your kid is the one playing in the street, and all of a sudden like you're putting up the sign that says slow kids playing. Not slow kids, but slow down. Kids are playing. All of these things.
That's slow family. They're always getting in the way.
Slow family is everywhere.
And they die a lot too. I always see the slow funeral signs.
Yes.
The slow family is they're just so much trouble. But now
I'm sorry.
It's somewhere else.
We're digressing to silliness. But it really is like we start to care about that when it affects us personally. When it becomes something that in our lives we see that it has happened or it could happen. All of a sudden it becomes, if you don't have kids, you don't care about what's happening with the school board. Because it's not a big deal.
They're not driving slow right now.
No, they are not. That's my next door neighbor, he never does. But it really is a matter of trying to see how it affects people before it affects us personally. Mm-hmm. And how can we care for others? You mentioned the Good Samaritan earlier, and so maybe we'll finish with that. That the Samaritan on the road wasn't someone who knew the guy who got beat up. He wasn't his friend, he wasn't his buddy, he wasn't someone who already knew him. He was someone who just happened across a stranger and was filled with compassion. And Jesus tells us that is the person who is like God. That is the person who treats them like a neighbor. And as we think about how we are walking through life, through the pandemic, through everything that we do, how are we treating those people that we just encountered, that we have no personal standing with? We just are encountering them, and how are we treating them, and how are we keeping them safe? And that is what God is calling us to do. Jesus tells us very plainly in the story that to love God and to love other people is what on all the laws are based on. All of them. And so if you're going to love God and you're going to love people, you have to do the things that actually love God and love people. And that sucks, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes loving people is hard, but everything else rests on that. Loving God and loving people.
Absolutely. It's the life I want to live. It's difficult.
As difficult as it may be.
And I just want to say, this may be uncomfortable. This isn't hard.
No,
Yeah.
it's not.
People compare this to persecution. They don't know what persecution is.
No.
They don't live in places where they get shot at for attending church. They don't have their family shut out socially and economically. They don't know what it's like to be physically tortured. and this is not physical torture. I know we may joke about it, but it's not. And it is actually fulfilling our faith to take on these things and to care for our neighbors in whatever way we can. And that includes going beyond wearing the mask, going beyond getting your vaccination, and includes checking on your neighbors. As Kelley mentioned earlier, our extrovert friends are not okay. The isolation is hard. And especially for older folks who often live alone, who don't get out much. That isolation is hard, and it helps to check on them.
It does. So call somebody, y'all.
Call someone.
Yeah, call somebody.
Wear your mask, get a vaccine, and call your neighbor.
Yeah, or go stand in their front yard and chat with them.
Yeah, outside.
Outside's good.
Outside is good. Anyway, next week we will be back at Waterman's, and we will have church at 6 a.m. 6 a.m. No,
Whoa.
Good
6
Lord.
p.m. We will not be up at
Well, you
6
can't
a.m.
drink all day if you don't start in the morning.
Well, you know, we all need something to look forward to. 6 p.m. we will be in the Ohana room, and we will be having church, so come and join us there. See y'all soon.
Go in peace, everybody.